Thank you, everybody. I'm Margaret Carney, Director of the International Museum of Dinnerware Design in Kingston, New York. Dan's going to be talking to us about his fantastic career as a designer and a model maker and mold maker of dinnerware and lots of other things. And I think you've all read his introduction. So I want to introduce Dan Mehlman and welcome you to give your presentation about your, I think, exclusive career. I don't know anybody that's had a career like you, Dan. We're really looking forward to hearing about it and seeing images of work that you've designed and other designers you've worked with. So I turn it over to Dan Mehlman.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank you and Bill for having me here, and thanks to everyone who's on Zoom. I'm going to read a bit of a statement. I'm going to do a little bit of a show and tell, and then we'll go to the slideshow. And I got a lot of pictures to get through, so I'm going to try to be efficient here. And I got a lot of notes, so I'll be reading some of it. Okay. So I'm a freelance model maker, mold maker, and designer in the tableware industry. And my education and experience is as an artist and a potter. Most of my commercial work is in ceramics, though that has led me to work in glass and other materials too. As a model maker, to put it simply, I translate drawings into physical objects as part of the development of new products. This can involve anything from close tolerance machine work to freehand sculpting. I've been doing this work for over 40 years, since before CAD, 3D printing, CNC machining, etc. became commonplace. For better or worse, I made a decision long ago that I wasn't going to invest in learning digital technology. So here in 2025, I'm a dinosaur. I still draw with a pencil at a drafting table and make molds and models by hand with plaster. This is how ceramic forms have been developed in industry for a long time. I may be of the last generation of mold and model makers to depend completely on manual techniques. To be clear, all my services are pre-production work. I don't do any commercial production of finished goods in my shop. Let me also note that due to time restraints, this presentation is limited to the commercial work that I've done for a living all these years. I have an entirely separate life of my own in my personal artwork, which I don't have time to show you. So I have an extensive website, mehlmandesign.com. There you'll find some of the material I'm presenting tonight and also some fun stuff, I hope. If you're interested in seeing my artwork, you can find pages there for ceramics, printmaking, painting, collage, and figure drawing. And since Margaret didn't mention it, I want to mention that all these videos are archived. You can find the link on their homepage to all these talks. I counted 35 of them, and I'll be referring to a couple of them, so I thought I'd mention that. And this one presumably will be on that list in a week or so after Bill edits them. Okay, so today's presentation, I'll show examples of my commercial work in models and molds, and then I'll show some design projects I've done, and then at Margaret's request, I'll end with a few pictures of my workshop. And I was once a ceramics teacher too, so I'll have to embed a ceramics lesson in here too. Before I show the slides, I'm going to do a brief show and tell about model making and ceramic manufacturing. I hope you'll bear with me for a few minutes so you can better understand the work I'm going to show. Okay, so this plate is a plaster plate. And it's more fragile than ceramics, but it can be handled and probably not as fragile as you might imagine. So I make two different kinds of models. So this is what I would call a study model or an appearance model. So this is just part of the design process. It has no application in actually tooling up a project. It's just made because a designer is working in 2 dimensions and you want to have something to handle. And sometimes they want to send an object to a factory or do consumer testing. There are all kinds of reasons to make sort of plaster mock-ups of a piece. And before 3D printing and all that stuff, this was the easiest way to make something. To make it actually in ceramic is a huge project. So I've made a lot of these kind of plaster models. Okay, so that is one kind. That is what I would call a design model or a study model. The other kind of model are models that are actually physically used to create molds and to start production. So I brought in a mold here to show you, and I'm going to take one section off. It's a mold for a vase. So there's one side of the mold. Can you see that? I hope you can. I'm going to put that aside. And here's the other side of the mold with a model in it, okay? And I'm going to remove the model. I can do this, okay. Remove the model, so here's the mold. So it's a three-part mold. In this case, there were the two big sections, and there's this little piece in the bottom to make the underside of the vase. Okay, so let me show you the model now. This is the model that I used to make that mold. So this is a solid plaster model that I turned on the lathe, just like you turn wood on a wood turning lathe. Same tools, same equipment. And it wouldn't have to be a turn piece. There would be the same thing if it was a sculpted piece or some geometrical shape. In this case, it happens to be a turn piece. And of course, being in dinnerware, I do a lot of turnings. So this is a mold for slip casting, and I'm going to explain what that process is for those of you who aren't familiar with ceramics. You can see in this model, well, I'll show you other things about the model later. I have a slide that'll give you the same model. So let me just explain slip casting very briefly. Slip casting is one of three manufacturing techniques that I'm gonna mention, and this is the one that I'm most involved in. So you have a plaster mold. Plaster has the quality that it sucks moisture like a sponge, right? So you fill this with slip. Slip is clay in liquid form. And just as an aside, sometimes you'll see something referred to as slipware. That usually means pottery that's decorated using slip as a decorating material. That's something different. This is slip casting. Okay, so if you can picture this mold and you can picture liquid slip, liquid clay, and you're filling the mold. And as that mold sits there full of slip, it's pulling moisture out of the slip. And so the solids are being deposited on the inside surface here. So then after a period of time, you turn the mold over, drain out the slip, and what's left behind is the piece. And of course, the longer you leave it in the mold, the thicker the accumulation of clay. So that's how you control the thickness in a piece like that. So I hope that was clear enough. It's kind of a cursory explanation, but that's what slip casting is all about. Now, many different ceramic products are made out of in the slip casting process. Like I'm listing here decorative objects like, for instance, vases, lamps, cookie jars, all those kind of things. Sculptural objects like everything from really fine porcelain figurines and animal figures and such, all the way down to cheap souvenir like knickknacks, all slip cast. And there's some studio potters and artists work with slip casting, and there's a whole industry for hobby ceramics that's all based on slip cast ware. And I can guarantee you that we've all had contact with slip cast ware today. And I say that because it's also how sinks and toilets are made, which is called sanitary ware. Specifically in dinnerware, only the hollow accessories would be slip cast, like pitchers, teapots, terrine, sugar creamer, salt and pepper. Those kind of hollow figure pieces in industry for dinnerware would be made in slip casting. So now I'm going to mention two other processes, because that begs the question, if only the hollowware is made slip casting, well, how do you make plates? So I'm going to go back to my little plate here and try to describe two other processes. The first is jiggering. Jiggering is, you can think of it almost as mechanized throwing, right? So you would have a machine kind of like a potter's wheel that spins, and you'd have a mold, you'd have a way to put a mold on there. You'd have a lot of molds and you'd set it on this machine. And if you were making this plate face down like this, the mold would have the positive impression of this. So the mold would be making this side of the plate, the face side of the plate. And then as you turn them, as the machine starts spinning like a potter's wheel, there's an arm of some kind with a profile template that comes down and presses the clay onto the mold and forms this back profile. So between the mold side and the back profile, you get the thickness of the plate. And this, in some cases, this could be just sort of an adapted potter's wheel. Potters can set up, do jiggering. There are all kinds of traditional hand jiggering machines. And you go on YouTube and look around, you'll find amazing high-speed, fully automated jiggering machines that are just pumping out plates and cups at an alarming rate. So that's jiggering. It's a very efficient way to make things, but it's limited to round things, of course, because it's based on the rotation of the machine. So one more technique, if you needed to make we want to machine make pieces and they were not round, what would you do? The common practice is to use a process called ram pressing. It's called ram because ram is the name of the company that builds the machines. So put very simply, I'll show you again on the plate, if you had a bottom section to this mold, like I described for jiggering, a bottom section that made this surface, and then you had a second mold section that made the top of this, and then you take those two, in this case, they're called dies, not molds, but you take those two dies and you put them on a hydraulic press that opens up, you put clay in there, and then it slowly comes down with many tons of pressure and just squeezes that object out, right? So now you know 3 ways that ceramics are made. You can pour clay into a mold, you can spin it on a wheel, or you can squeeze it on a ram press. And this is all, I'm mentioning all this because when I get to showing you models, I'll identify, the specific processes that those models were made for, I should say. Okay, I hope that's been clear. Now, why don't we start the slides? Yeah, this is good? Yep. This is my daughter-in-law, Emily. She's being my assistant here. Okay. So this is basically what I just showed you. It's the same, it's the model I just showed you. Here's the mold. You can see it's in 2 parts plus this little piece here. And this is pretty explanatory. So this has been, the slip was poured in, came out, drained out. Then here's the freshly, well, not freshly made because this is bone dry already, but this is the unfired clay piece. Here I've added some color to it and bisque fired it. That's the first firing, the bisque firing. Here I've applied glaze, a clear glaze, and done the high fire glaze firing. So the most obvious thing to observe here is the difference in size between the model and the finished piece, because ceramics always shrinks when it dries and again when it's fired. So if I want to make this object, if somebody hires me to make the tooling for making this object, I have to expand it by whatever shrinkage rate they tell me their material does to make the model this size and the mold this size. The other thing I'll quickly mention, a couple other things you might be able to notice the seam line is marked out on the model. That's to determine this plane here. And this piece up here in the top, this disc, was there to form this, and that's called the spare. And that is because as the water is coming out of the slip, you're lessening the volume in there, so the level drops. So you need a reservoir to keep feeding the mold so you don't get it starved out up here at the top. Okay, I think that's the whole lesson about that. Okay, I'm just seeing where I am on my notes. Okay, we're good. And also, the reason this piece is yellow is just because I throw some shellac on it. It's made out of the same plaster as this. Okay, now this is the other kind of mold, which I already modeled, which I already mentioned, a study model. And these were all models that I made, handmade plaster models that I made for Dansk. And they were from various designers. And it's been a long time. I don't remember who designed what, except I think I did this little one. But so these are all plates like what I showed you. And this, again, these are also study models. This was an industrial designer named Lorenzo Porcelli, who was a great person to work with. And he designed this line. I think it's called Arctic for Dansk. And these are all plaster models. The hollow, some of these are probably solid actually, because they're just visual models. There's the oval platter from that line. There's his coffee pot, which I think is just such a beautiful shape. He's a very good designer. Lorenzo Porcelli. These were, again, study models. This was for what was then called Corning Consumer Products. This is Corningware serving pieces. And even these, this stemware are plaster models for someone. And yes, there is a little brass rod running through these stems to hold that thing together. And these are also study models. And this is how I'm going to introduce the work I did for Eva Zeisel, because this was hers. This was, let me get to my notes here. This is called Pinnacle, and this was for international China. And I made all these preliminary models and study models with her. And she came to my studio a number of times, and we sat and carved these handles together, and I had a great time. It was wonderful getting to know her. This was the first project I did for her. These are the actual pieces that International China made. And from what I've read, they were made with very limited time and very limited quantities. This was not, International China, this is not really their wheelhouse. They're kind of mass marketplace manufacturer. But my opinion of these, I was saying the other day, I think they're really beautiful shapes, but I like them better as sculpture than I do as dinnerware. So these, I don't know how many of these are out there anywhere. This is also for Eva. So this, now we're talking about tooling model again. So she called me up and said, I'm sending you something. So these pictures were from when she was working in Schramberg in about 1930. She designed these when she, her first design job. And these were in her big retrospective show in 1984, I think it was, that sort of launched her second career. She had stopped designing in the 60s and 70s. She had this big retrospective and people paid attention to her again. And it sort of launched the second act to her career, which is what I was involved in. So she sent me these and she said, could you please make molds on these? And I said, heck no, I'm not going to pour plaster on these things. They might be the only ones that exist. No way I'm going to do that. But I will make measured drawings from them and make new models and make molds, which is what I did. And I do a lot of this kind of reproduction work, as you'll see. And in this case, the molds were sent down to a small shop in North Carolina that these might have been sold in the Museum of Modern Art store for a while. Okay, so that's Pinnacle. This is a similar situation. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her museum dinnerware, museum white dinnerware. And so she gave me, she sent me an original, which you don't see here. And I, again, made measured drawings and scaled them up for shrinkage and made this model and a mold and passed it off to Marek Sakula. If any of you are ceramics people, you might know Marek's name. And he made a few samples. And there's a story goes with this, but we'll leave that for later maybe. And these are her Red Wing salt and pepper shakers from 1947 that was reproduced for the company Eva Zeisel Originals. And these are models that I made for her. These are earthenware, which has a lower shrinkage. So you can see the disparity in size is not as great as in the porcelain piece because they're not scaled up as much because they don't need to be. And then finally, when she was 100 years old, she designed this dinnerware line for Nambe. And I made these models. I don't know if anything went any further than that. I don't think I've ever seen produced pieces. So I doubt that they were made, but maybe someone can correct me. So moving on, this is for Mottahedeh, which is a wonderful company. They're a century-old company that specializes in fine porcelain reproductions of European and Asian tableware and often licensed by major museums and historic sites. Excuse me. The president is Wendy Kavalheim, who did one of these Zooms a couple of months ago, and I recommend you go look at the Mottahedeh one. Excuse me. So this is their reproduction of a terrine called the Duke of Gloucester terrine. The original is in Colonial Williamsburg collection and was made by Royal Worcester around 1770. Mottahedeh sent me down to Williamsburg and I did a detailed study of this piece. Then I came home and made this model. It's a plaster model. Now it's sent to Portugal to have to be made in porcelain. And again, I want to reiterate, well, maybe I haven't said it, but I'm strictly a shape guy. So I can't take credit for any of these beautiful decals or any other two-dimensional decoration that you may see in this show. I just make shapes. Okay. And a few other Mottahedeh pieces. So this was some pieces are reproductions where you're really trying to nail it as a reproduction. Some pieces are more adaptations, like this porcelain vase. I believe that I was given a small silver piece to work from, and I adapted it to be a piece like this. There's two. This was something. This was actually, I think this was made originally as sort of a government project of some kind. This represents the capitals of the columns in the Senate office building. And originally Wendy had them made in India in brass, and then she had them made in Italy in ceramic. And this is a picture with a relief decoration. I can't remember how this came about, to tell you the truth. Little terrine. This is a line of dinnerware I did for Mottahedeh that was the Tony Duquette line. And so this image here and here are decals. All this coral stuff is all in relief. And I spent many, many tedious hours making making the models for all these pieces. Oh, wait, I thought I had a picture of I guess not, of the model. But so this is all in low relief and then hand painted. So I sculpted all this coral on all these pieces and made the models of the shapes. 10-sided plate, which is unusual. So this was also for Mottahedeh. They did a couple of partnerships with Rookwood. I'm sure some of you are collectors out there. You're familiar with historic pottery called Rookwood. So Rookwood produced some pieces for Mottahedeh, sort of in the arts and crafts style that they're known for. And I made the models for these. Here's the plaster models, which were quite interesting to make and pretty tricky molds because of the sections of molds that have to come out of these spaces here. Those are my plaster models for those pieces. Also, Rookwood for Mottahedeh did a bunch of these pine cone trays. This is huge. It's like about, I think, 18, 19 inches long. And we did them. This is the large, and we did large, medium, and small. And I sculpted on all these pieces. There's the plaster model of the small piece. There's the two of them with the molds. These were actually molds for slip casting samples. I don't know if it ever went ahead. If they had gone into production, they would have gone ahead and ram pressed them. But slip casting was a convenient way to make the initial samples. Okay, now we're talking about Pewabic pottery in Detroit, another historic pottery formed in 1903. Still there, still in the original factory, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's an interesting place to visit. It's in Detroit, if I didn't say that, Detroit. And this was based on this is about an 8-inch piece, but it was based on a huge piece in their collection, a historic Pewabic piece. So I made the models and molds for that. Another Pewabic project, they were selling these nesting bowls, which is a nice set, but they were throwing them. And I mean, I can't even wrap my head around trying to throw 3 bowls that nest perfectly like this. It's a very difficult task. So they decided they would ram press them. So I took their samples and let's see if I can blow that up so you can see it. Yeah, I developed this drawing to figure out how these pieces were going to nest and what they were going to look like. And I made 3 models. And of course, here you can see I made an extra set to cut it in half and make this demonstration project. And then these are the final products that actually came out of what I did. And this is one more Pewabic piece, this vase. I can't remember exactly what I was given to start with here. I think there was a sketch and maybe some reference material. But I wanted to show you this particular project because I'm going to show you a complete soup to nuts job. Okay, so keep in mind what this finished piece looks like. And there's my drawing. So I made it, although I had some sketches, I made a drawing both to get agreement on what we were doing and also to use as a guide for my lathe turning of the shape. And there's the final model of the piece. Okay, now this is ceramics lesson 2, so bear with me. I'm showing you this because this is soup to nuts project, and I'm going to describe it now. Here's the model that I just showed you. Here's the first mold that was made off that model. That's called a block mold. So now you have a mold, but that doesn't really help you very much because in slip cast ceramics, you need lots of molds. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is that they wear out and you're constantly replacing them. And the other is that, as I mentioned, the mold pulls this moisture out of the slip. Well, the mold has to dry to do that. It's like you can't keep using a sponge without squeezing it out, right? So usually you can only get about 2 casts a day out of a mold. So if you're trying to make hundreds of pieces, you can only imagine how many molds you need. And if you go into any slip casting shop, you'll find huge tables full of molds that they're casting one after the other. And you can only imagine at Kohler where they're making toilets with the space that just floors and floors of a huge factory with these giant molds. And any kind of factory that routinely does slip casting will have a plaster shop that's almost like a little factory within a factory because they've got to be constantly feeding the beast, making molds. So how do you do that efficiently? Well, you can't keep making them off the model like these were made. It just doesn't make sense for a number of reasons. So you make what's called a case. So these are kind of a simplified version of a case. And so when I pour plaster in here, I get a mold section like that. And up here are the actual production molds that you'd pour slip into. So these are the parts of 3 molds, and here's one that's assembled. So that's 4 production molds up there that I made to get them started, but in the factory, they can make more molds off of this case. So another way to look at it is this. This vase here, this model, it's a positive object, right? It's a real positive object in space. So that's a positive. So then the mold is a negative space. So then the case is a positive because it's making the mold, that's the negative, and you're using the mold to then make the pieces, which are positive. So this is the essence of mold making. You're always thinking inside out like this. And it takes a long time to kind of wrap your head around how to think about this stuff because, you're always kind of thinking inside out, positive, negative. Let's see, I think that's it for Pewabic. And then now this was for a company and also an old pottery called Haeger Pottery. I founded in 1871. If I'm not mistaken, they're actually founded to make bricks for rebuilding Chicago after the Great Fire. So they were founded in 1871 and they closed in 2016. And these 2 vases are reproductions of historic pieces. And the interesting thing here was they hired me to do this, to make these models. And all they gave me were little tiny black and white catalog shots from the 1930s. That's all I had to go on. I mean, I'm sure they could have found collectors who had pieces, but that's all they gave me. So I had to kind of invent what these things, they're reproductions, but half of it's invented, because I just had the one view. And so that's what I wound up making these. And this is exactly the same story, ditto. These are historic pieces that I had like almost nothing to work from. But in more modern times, Haeger did tons of these collections, this sort of like home decor objects that they did. And they did these collections that are all sort of different themes, right? And frankly, I don't even know I can't remember who even designed these if I ever knew, but I made the models for all these. In fact, I made over 100 models for Haeger pottery. So this is like sort of an arts and crafts style This is, I don't know what, Jetsons, mid-century, space age, who knows what pieces. Yeah, I made all of these. This is like a sort of a nature theme. I remember carving these leaf pieces. This is what, French provincial kind of look, I suppose. And this is also one of these Haeger groups. And if you look at these white pieces here, you can see they're all decorated with this like sort of bunch of grapes themes, right? So all these hollow pieces, these would be slip cast, and then these flat pieces would be ram pressed. And here are the models that I made. So this is the complete set of that job. So these pieces, and again, you can see here are the models for the slip cast pieces, and you can see they all have a spare on them. And then these pieces were all ram pressed. Did a lot of work for a company called Rico International, which they did a lot of different things, including some sort of housewares-y kind of stuff. This is just an example of work I did with them. These were, it says Romertoff because he was the distributor in the US for Romertoff, which are those German-made clay bakers. You may remember them. And so this was a related project. These are actually, I believe, ram pressed in Mexico. And you can see this baking dish here is there's my plaster model, and there's the piece. So again, all tooling models. Then a couple little one-off projects. This was one I was happy to work on. This was for a couple of people who were starting a company to make this one product because of, well, the idea of these is that they're for people who have a disability that make it difficult to handle either mental or physical disability, make it difficult to handle a regular cup. So they developed the design of this handle and brought it to me. And I did some improvements to the handle to make it more makeable and figured out some cups and made a bunch of samples. Normally I wouldn't, as a job, wouldn't do finished glazed ware like this, but they wanted samples to test with their consumers, their population who needed such things. So I thought it was a worthwhile endeavor. So I was happy to work on these. This is a funny story. Guy comes to me and says he's the director or the producer of commercials for Dunkin' Donuts. And Dunkin' Donuts has decided, this was long ago at that time, that this was the iconic mug that was going to appear in every Dunkin' Donut, in all Dunkin' Donuts advertising at the time. Except that they only owned two of them and were never able to find any more. And one of them was locked in a vault at headquarters. So this poor guy had one precious cup to make these commercials with. He told me, if you watch the commercials, you'll see people sitting around drinking coffee, but you'll never see a shot with more than one person with a cup in his hand. So they were desperate for more of these things. So I, again, like all these reproduction projects, did a measured drawing off the original and models and molds. And Potter Dan Levy, who's a friend of mine, he made the pieces. And I mean, I'm not even sure which is the original of these two. They really came out very convincing. Yeah. And I'll show you some work in the sort of tchotchke knick-knack area. I've done a lot of that. This was for Danbury Mint. You may recall from the days when people had newspapers that in the Sunday supplement, there would be these big fold-out two-page ads from Danbury Mint and Franklin Mint and all these companies that did collectible kind of things. And this is spices of the world, So when I look at this, to me, it's like, yeah, this is kind of a ridiculous product, but what do I care? To me, I have my own opinions, but really what I care about is it going to be a fun project to work on? Is it going to be easy enough that I can make some money doing it? So these were fun to do. And as an aside, I'll tell you that at the time that they published this ad, they had not yet started production. They may not have even found the factory in China to make these at the time, but they had definitely not produced them. And this is actually my plaster models painted with acrylic paint. Okay, where are we now? Oh, this was a project I did, a pro bono project I did for my local public radio station. They used to have this sort of shtick about the flying pig, so I made flying pig piggy bank. And this was a fun one. And the pieces were produced and decorated by a guy I knew, Hans Schindhelm, who came out of the German porcelain industry. He had worked for many years at Goebel, where they make the Hummel figures. So he was a super decorator, and he did a real nice job decorating these. These also, Hans and I we started a project. This is as far as it got, but we were gonna do these. They would have been painted very nicely by him. This is as far as we got. These are porcelain casts, but I just thought I'd show them because they're kind of fun, and I had a good time sculpting these. I wish we'd done a whole range of these. Would have been fun. Okay, now to sort of wrap up the mold making, I want to talk a little bit about work I do for studio potters, which I've always done, and I still do a lot of work with studio people. So this is Michael Wainwright. He's a ceramist. He's in Sheffield, Mass, in the Berkshires. And he had an interesting arrangement. He was a studio potter, and he wound up in a contract with Lenox China for a number of years. They actually sort of made him a brand. They sort of owned his name and his work, and he designed all this stuff for them. It started out as dinnerware and pottery, and went into eventually there was glassware and flatware. This whole Michael Wainwright line that they did, and I made a lot of the models for that ceramic ware. And the thing that was intriguing to me is I got his designs in the form of ceramic pieces that he made. And Michael has a very loose kind of way of working. So the challenge to me was to maintain the spirit and the look of his work, while at the same time making it look a little more like a consumer product and also making it manufacturable, because I probably couldn't even pull the mold off the things that he made because they were just handmade objects. So this is an example at the top. This is what he gave me. And, nice idea, but not really resolved as a consumer product. And then here's the plaster model that I made. So the thing that made these jobs interesting and sort of fun to do is that Michael really trusted me and really gave me a free hand to interpret his work into a different kind of product. Another guy would have been nitpicky and it's a situation that could have gone south, if it weren't somebody I had such a good relationship with. These plates are also made for him, and these, again, I'm imitating the kind of wonkiness of these plates, which, believe me, doing this is a lot harder than making just a perfectly round plate, introducing all this kind of curvature. So that's Michael Wainwright. This is Dan Levy, friend of mine, very fine porcelain potter. He's in Rochester, New York now. He makes really high quality slip cast porcelain dinnerware, mostly in commissioned sets, services for large numbers of people. And I think his shapes are fairly simple, but I think his decoration is kind of inventive and tasteful. I really like what he does. We have some of his pieces that we use a lot, and I made all his molds, basically. This is a square plate that he makes, square bowls that he makes. This is some of the decoration he's played with. I really like his work. This is the third of those three potters I want to show you. This is a guy named David Smythe, who lives not far from me. And he and his wife, Judy Sid, are sort of traditional stoneware potters. But they started developing this line of specialty crocks. These are really big pieces. So this one happens to be a water filtration crock. So there are four parts. There's a base, and there's the crock, and there's a lid, and then inside there's an insert that holds a disposable or replaceable carbon filter. So he was throwing these, and when he started getting a lot of orders, these are big pieces. That's a lot of work to throw all of these. So he decided he wanted to start slip casting them. And he does several different crocks. There's a kombucha fermentation crock. There's a boxed wine crock. There's a water cooler crock. He's actually been quite successful with these. So I had him provide me with with models that he threw. So I can work from someone's models. I usually ask potters to give me just bisqueware, and then I'll put a cold finish on them. So he made these. They're scaled up for shrinkage already. Actually, this is interesting. A lot of people forget this. If potters want to make molds, you actually have to scale up for two shrinkages because you're making the piece You're firing it, it shrinks then. Then you're taking molds from it, making pieces, firing the pieces. So it's actually double shrinkage that you have to compensate for. So he brought me these pieces. I went over them and did a bunch of work on the surface to clean them up a bit and made the spares you see here. And there's what I delivered to him. Those are plaster molds. Still a lot of work to handle those big molds, but not as much work as throwing. Now, at this point, I'll show you two other types of mold making I've done that are not related to dinnerware, but having done all this dinnerware stuff and done so much of it and bringing those skills along with me, I wound up doing a lot of different things. This is a mold for the torso of a porcelain doll. Now, in their, I guess, early 80s, I made probably hundreds of sections of doll molds. I got to be really expert at making molds for porcelain dolls. I want to be clear that I never sculpted a porcelain doll. That's a specialty. And I'm not particularly interested in porcelain dolls either. So that's not really my thing. But I really got good at making these molds, which I kind of enjoyed doing. And it was great training for learning how to efficiently make molds that are of odd shapes, unusual shapes. So this particular doll, okay, we're going to talk about dolls for a moment. Most porcelain dolls, the head and the four limbs are sewn into a fabric body. This is a little more ambitious doll where you actually have a jointed doll, you have ball and socket joints. So that's why this requires these pieces to create the recess for the socket, for the ball and socket joint. Porcelain dolls, I haven't done them in a long time. Sort of to an opposite extreme, this is machine work on a large scale. This is for a company local to me called Blash Precision Ceramics. And they have a very interesting process, which I won't describe now, but they make precision parts in ceramics that have all kinds of industrial applications. I don't even know what they are. But this was a project they were involved in. I worked for them for 2 or 3 years, making all these shapes that were like cones and tubes and funnels, all these different shapes that I believe were used, and they were made out of this proprietary silicon carbide material, fired very high. If any potters out there, I'm talking like cone 18. They were very hard, very wear resistant. And they were, from what I understand, they were used in systems where like ground up ore is blown at incredibly high speed and volume through this ductwork. And these were like fittings for that system that were high wear resistance. So here you see that. So this is, I made this core and that formed the inside of the piece. And then I laid up plaster on that and turned it again and made the outside of the piece. And I worked for fantastic people. The engineer who developed the material became a friend of mine. And there was a machinist, a master machinist, who I taught him a lot about plaster, and he taught me a lot about making stuff. And I will say that these pieces, I mean, look at the sizes. That's 16 inches, which is the maximum I can put on my lathe. I was given drawings and specifications with a tolerance of plus or minus 20 thousandths of an inch, which you think would be impossible to do on this scale by hand. But if you just take your time and inch up on it bit by bit by bit, most of these dimensions I did nail within that tolerance of 20 thousandths, which is pretty tight. And then here's the mold that I made from that particular piece. This is a 600-pound mold that I made from that piece. And this is in their factory. It's on a vibratory table, and they're feeding this material in through these feed tubes. And there's the actual object. Not of much aesthetic interest, but it was really fantastic. I really liked working on this stuff. But eventually they just decided that this whole program was not working for them for some reason, probably because it was cheaper to get stuff made in Mexico or something. But they went out of that. Okay, now I'm going to talk about Steuben glass. So I come from a ceramics background, but I sort of backed into a lot of glass work. Now, Steuben, if you're familiar with them, they're a great company. I worked for them for maybe 20 years until they closed in 2011. You seeing a theme here? They made a lot of these solid glass pieces. That's what they were known for. One of the things they were known for. So these are like absolutely perfect crystal in these shapes with this elaborate engraving in the back. And the way this stuff is made, without getting too technical, briefly, the way these are made is the process they call the SAG process. I don't know if anybody else does it, but they would have a model of some kind. They'd make a mold out of a refractory material, sort of a clay plaster mix. You fire the mold, put it in the kiln, and then they take a piece of their perfect glass, which had been perfectly polished and inspected on one side, and just place it in the mold. And they bring it up to temperature, and the piece just goes bloop and melts and fills the mold. So the good thing about that process is that you're not like making seams or anything. You're not pouring in, and you can maintain the integrity of the glass because it's still the same solid piece of glass, just melted into a different configuration. The problem with it is it delivers a pretty rough piece. So all this sculpting you see here, this is all done on each piece, grinding and polishing and cutting this crystal, very laborious um, efforts to make this. And frankly, the guys, when I got into there, the guys who were doing the mold making were not really inventive or very experienced mold makers. They were I think they were sort of hot glass guys who got shunted off into the mold shop for some reason. So the pieces they were making were these big clunky blanks that required vast amounts of work to get it to the point you see here. And I came along, and because I'd done all this all this ceramic mold making and all this block and case work, and I had done a lot of rubber mold making, I sort of brought a whole new way of making these such that the pieces that came out of the molds were much, much closer to the finished piece. And my friend Peter Drobny, who was a designer there, I mean, he recently said to me, you saved the company hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in labor by how you changed the mold shop there. So I did a lot of this work. I'll show you a bunch of pieces. This is James Houston, who did a lot of this kind of thing. David Dowler, Joel Smith. So these are all shapes that I made and made the tooling for. This is another Joel Smith piece. This is a special commission. It's actually 3 separate pieces that fit together. There's Peter Drobny. We had fun making these. And this Mobius Prism by Peter Drobny. That's a really wonderful, ambitious piece. And then later, in a little while, when I get to the design part of the presentation, I'll show you the design work I did for Steuben. This was Catherine D'Souza, another designer who became a good friend. And she was a freelance product designer who worked for tableware companies and all different kinds of materials. And she was very active and very good at developing new clients, and just a very savvy entrepreneur and designer. And I became her go-to model maker. And so she would introduce herself and get jobs in these different factories, different manufacturers, and I'd sort of piggyback basically on her entrepreneurship. And I would do her model making work there, and then the company would know me, and I would get other work from them. So probably 3/4 of the business I built could be traced back to Catherine D'Souza connections, if not more. So this is work for Valsa Lambert, which is a Belgian crystal company, and we did all these animals together. I would make them in clay. She'd come and work with me on them a little. Then I'd make a mold and make them in plaster, and we work on them some more. And eventually the finished plaster models, I believe, went to a mold maker in Paris who would make, I imagine, steel molds that then went to Belgium to Valsa Lambert, who did this pressed glassware. And I just want to point out that the reason we work this way is that when you're sculpting in clay, you can, move the material around, add, subtract. It's a very flexible, manipulable, if that's a word, I'm not going to try to say it. It's a material you can manipulate a lot. And but it's hard to put a really great finish and a really great detail on it. So the way I do a lot of work is work in clay first to get the shape right, make a mold from it, cast plaster in that mold. Now you have the clay piece reproduced in plaster, and you can do all that finish work and detailing on plaster. And so I worked with Catherine on a lot of this stuff. I like the eagle. The eagle's one of my favorites. We did all these animals. Oh, these duck decoys. I really like the duck decoys. So that was with Catherine. And then here's another company I worked with Catherine. These are her designs for a company called Wilton Armetale. Wait, where am I on my list? Oh, they closed in 2010. You see how many of these companies that I've worked for no longer exist. So this is aluminum. This is cast in a proprietary aluminum alloy that they made. And one point I'll make here is that casting these, they're all cast in two-part sand cast in a foundry. But so some mold maker in the foundry made all the master tooling for that from my models. And since it's just a two-part mold, the models are the same as if I were doing a ram press model. So there was no big transition for me to go from ceramics into this metal work. I always liked this tray of Catherine's from that line. And this is also Catherine's for Armetale. It was this sort of Adirondack style theme. And I always joke that this is where I got to be expert at doing fake birch bark in plaster, which must be some kind of life skill, I guess. So here's a plaster model of a picture frame and the aluminum piece. And then, as I say, then they know me, and I did all this other work for Armetale. This was a group for Betty Baugh, who's a designer in California. This was designed by Will Prindle, a wonderful designer who's, I believe, no longer with us, I'm afraid. Okay, so here's more aluminum work, but this is not for Wilton Armetale. This was for Dansk. And these were designed by Klein Reed. And I will mention that Klein Reed also did a Zoom like this that you might want to watch. So far I've mentioned Eva Zeisel, Klein Reed, and Mottahedeh are the three people who you can find similar Zoom lectures for. So these were line extensions for two dinnerware lines that they designed. Line extensions meaning the dinnerware was made, and then they followed it up with other products and other materials to kind of go along with it. So this one's kind of like a leaf theme. It's kind of hard to see in these pictures. And this one, if you look, you can see this kind of irregular pleating pattern. So I made the models for all these. And this is the dinnerware that upper one relates to. And I made the models for that dinnerware too. Okay, so finally, let's move on to design work. Design, as you can see, is a sort of secondary, not secondary, but I do a lot more model making than I do original design work. And most of the design work, I'm not a person who like follows trends and reads design, home shelter magazines and goes to department stores and such. I'm just not that kind of person. But I'm a competent designer, I think. So most of the design work I've done has either been pretty much straight on assignments, or it's been sort of sculptural ideas of my own that don't necessarily relate to the market, but I have suggested. So you'll see. So this was a project to design a whole bunch of stemware that was basically based on existing stemware. So it was not a lot of original design work, but I had fun doing all these drawings with a pencil. Yeah, I'm not the world's greatest draftsman, but I think I can do a competent job of this. My dad was a great draftsman. Okay, so this is some design work from the beginning of when I was doing this kind of thing. This was for international China. So when I say that Eva Zeisel work is not really in their wheelhouse, this is what they did, sort of middle America, kind of this mundane kind of stuff with sort of cutesy, sort of country cute is what I would call their style. So, it's kind of mundane stuff, but still somebody's got to design it. So I designed and made models for all this many years ago, as you can tell by 4-piece place setting for $39.99. Even this is for a shower curtain company. I did a bunch of bath accessories for them that I designed. This is for Corel, which is a fascinating product, and I love getting into the factory and seeing how it's made. And if we have time, I can talk about it a little bit. But Corel, as you probably know, usually you just see the coupe shape, no rim. and they were always they occasionally made attempts to develop a wide rim Corel, a more formal type of Corel. So I did a big study of all kinds of existing plates that they told me to look at, and came up with drawings and made the designed the shapes for the plates. The cups, I think, were existing pieces. This was for Dansk. I did 2 dinnerware lines for Dansk. So the assignment to me was, okay, you're a potter. Why don't you, and a designer and an industrial person too. So why don't you throw us a whole bunch of plates and try to come up with something that would work for a commercial dinnerware line that kind of suggested thrownware, which if I was well, some people might take offense at that, some strictly purist potters, but it was a job for me. Anyway, I made these plates. I must have thrown about 40 plates, and this was the pattern they picked. Might not have been my choice, but this is what they picked. And did a whole bunch of cups too. This was sort of roughly a shape that they selected. And this is the manufactured dinnerware line called Craft Colors. I think it was done in 3 different colors. And you can see here, there are all these accessory pieces went with it, the sugar creamer, pitcher, platter, casserole. And yeah, I can't remember what the 3rd color was, but so this was a commercially made Dansk project. And then this is the other dinnerware line I did for Dansk, which was sort of my wacky idea, but they liked it enough to go ahead and manufacture it. And I'll show you where this comes from. I made all these tile patterns for a guy I know who has a company called L'Esperance Tile, handmade tile company up in Saratoga area. And I did a whole bunch of original patterns for tile. And I really liked this one. And I guess I suggested to them, how about dinnerware that looked like that? So that's how this came about. And if you're sort of an anonymous designer like me, you don't get, your name's not on it. You don't really get rights of approval on things. So there are some things in this dinnerware line that I don't love, like these plates are way too flat and things like that. But this square plate, I got to say, I really like. We have a set of them. We use them all the time. So there was one really great piece out of there. Where are we now? Okay, now we're going into the glass world again for design. This was for Miller Rogashka is the name of the company. And these are a pair of candle holders. And the idea is fairly obvious. It's this whirlpool that swirls down from this piece and then continues down here. And I think it's kind of a neat design. And when they're together, they do this. And when they're separate, they're still kind of interesting pieces. So that was a glass project I initiated. And now we get into Steuben. Okay, so this is a piece called, this photograph is misleading. It looks huge. This is actually a piece that you would hold in your hand. It's maybe, no more than 3 inches long, maybe less. So Steuben always did well with anything that had a heart or a star, and also anything that you could engrave a message on. So obviously, these kind of love things were popular. So I thought, okay, so I set this problem to myself to design this. And I like to, it suits me to design things in the following way. I sort of set up a geometrical or proposition in space and say, well, what if you did this? What would that be? And I don't always know until I make it. So in this case, I'm saying to myself, okay, if you took a donut and you cut out 1/3 of it, you would see that round cross section of the donut. Well, what if that donut cross section was a heart? What would that look like? And I had no idea until I made it. And I made this, so I made this piece, and it actually is a fairly interesting piece. I had to fudge it a little on the bottom here so that it would stand correctly. But other than that, it's strictly just a geometric expression in space of a question that I asked. And, these, of course, most of them got engraved with some, love message. And they sold lots and lots and lots of these. So that was a very successful piece. I'm going to show you some successful pieces, and I'm going to show you some losers too. Now, this was another very successful piece. They call it Starlight. It's in two sizes. So there's Grand Starlight and Starlight. So as I said, they always did well with anything that had a star for giftware that they made. So this was again sort of a proposition I made to myself. I don't know if you can follow me when I say, what if you took a hemisphere and you inscribed this star on it. And then you started carving away and followed that star around the curve of the hemisphere. And then in the back of the hemisphere, it doesn't come to a point, it comes to a flat. So then those lines coming around form this smaller star back there. It's kind of complicated to explain, but that's how this idea came about. And it was like, yeah, what's this going to look like if we make it? And it turns out what it looks like is pretty darn dazzling object in their very bright Steuben crystal. And these are still being made because even though Steuben is closed, um, the Corning Museum of Glass has the rights to the name and the products, and they have certain pieces made overseas somewhere. I'm not sure exactly what. So that was a big hit for them. So oh, and then they wanted to do a little sort of hand cool. They call it a hand cooler, these little pieces they made, star. And I show this just to show this was like trying to sort of brainstorm what it could be. And this just shows that as a model maker designer, I can work directly into 3 dimensions. So it was very convenient for me to just sit and carve stars all day. And most of these shapes, I don't think I ever would have invented drawing on paper. So it's like working right into 3D. That's a kind of a thing of mine. And that's the little piece they made. I don't know how long they were produced, but that's the result. Okay, this was an idea I had. This was another proposition I made. So what if you have a cube and you put you mark off 4 squares on each face of the cube. And then inside that cube, you have a sphere embedded in that cube. And then you take off every other one of those little cubes to expose the spherical surface of the sphere. Well, what would that be like? And I originally designed it just as an object, but they decided to make it into a candle holder. And they're kind of a cool object. And if you put them together, they make a continuous kind of 3 dimensional checkerboard. The problem is that they were not so easy to manufacture, and they kept, if you can see where I'm pointing right in here, they kept getting what they call checks, little cracks in here. And even though they retooled the mold to make this be like a little collar up here, they could never solve that problem. So for whatever else was a plus or minus this design, it was a manufacturing problem. They also talked about doing a desk set at one point. And I developed this idea. I thought I was being terribly clever because, you know, these molds are very expensive. So I thought, well, if you did it like this, then you could make one mold to make this kind of truncated brick and then just put different face plates on them to make, you know, the flat for the clock and the card holder and the little dish here. So I thought it was a great idea. And they did get as far as making some samples. But it turned out they were not as easy to make as I thought. And the price went up to many thousands of dollars, which is probably more than you want to spend for something to put your paper clips in. So that's a project that sort of fell apart large, sort of more at the manufacturing and marketing end. And also these clocks never really were very good. So that was another failure. And here's one more. This was, you may remember, like I guess in the 90s, there was always this talk about cigars. You know, there were cigar bars, and so they thought, well, maybe we should do a cigar ashtray. But they called it a cigar bowl, so as not to use that horrible word, ashtray. And so I designed this piece, made this plaster model in molds. They made a couple of samples, and then they decided, no, we really don't want to be associated with the evils of smoking, which I totally sympathize with. But I still, so the project dropped there. So I went ahead and made molds and cast them in ceramic just for myself because I thought they were an interesting an interesting thing to look at. Am I doing on time? Oh, to the left. Okay, I'm a little bit over time here. I'm going to keep going anyway. Who cares? Okay, I'm pretty much wrapping up here. I can't resist showing you this. This was a reproduction of of a mirror in Winterthur, and it's a very historic, important mirror. I won't go into the whole thing, but I made the model for the reproduction of this piece. Here I'm in the furniture conservation lab carving a model, and there's the original there, which cannot be touched. You couldn't make a mold from it. So I did this all just from photographs and from 2 visits to Winterthur. And there's my plaster model and a few details. And just in case you think I've done everything but the kitchen sink, I made, this was a sink model and a mold. And so I'll quickly show you some quick shots of my studio, and then we'll wrap this up. So that's my shop. When we bought our house, it had this 2-car garage, and later on I put this addition on the back. And this is just right across the driveway from my home. And the whole front half is designed really around working with this one material, #1 pottery plaster. And I recently, in thinking about all this stuff, I was thinking, how much of this stuff have I used in my life? And I came up with a very conservative estimate of 15 tons, which kind of shocked me. And that's probably underestimating. So I've gone through a lot of this material. It's made in Oklahoma, by the way, mined and made in Oklahoma. So this is my main workbench area in my shop. This is the cabinet from my grandfather's dental office in the Bronx. This is a plaster area. I've got a mixing scale and mixer and all, and this is a granite tabletop that I do all my casting on. And this is my plaster wheel that I can run wet plaster. So it's similar to like a jigger. This is like the plaster equivalent of a jigger, because you can pour plaster on here. As it starts to set up, you can bring this arm down and form the plaster with a template. I think this picture kind of says it all. You can see what's happening here. And then across the way, got a bandsaw, milling machine, and this lathe that you saw before. Lathe is, same as wood turning. Yeah. Then in the whole addition in the back, I have this, this is basically a wood shop. I've got my beloved SawStop table saw, central dust collection hooked up to most of the machines. And I've done a lot of woodwork. I've done a lot of the furniture in my house, and I've built 2 canoes and 2 kayaks and worked on a lot of other sailboats back here. So I've done a lot of boat work back here too. And then here's a little ceramics area that I have. You can see, let's see, right to left molds, colors here, all the ceramic colors, slab roller, potter's wheel, kiln. And finally, upstairs in the old part, I have this sort of drawing area up here, which is very nice and clean sometimes, and a nice place to get away from the shop and work and even take a nap once in a while. So here's, I like to finish with this great old postcard, which I think is terrific, and especially because it's from Zanesville, Ohio, which is where I did my first mold making job. Oh, that didn't belong there. Oh, I'm getting out of order here a little bit. I'll show you this briefly. This is a piece I did for the Brooklyn Bridge Centennial. These are all the pieces I meant to put back in the show. This is that Carl stuff. I'm sorry, I'm asked backwards here. I'm sorry, but now I'm done. Okay, I'm done. So what do we do now? Stop
We
show.
thank you.
Okay, sorry I ran over a little bit.
I don't mind a bit. That was very wonderful. I appreciate your sense of humor through everything too.
Well, that'll get you through a
You're
lot.
so exacting in details, and you just have endless, wonderful information. But I like that you find humor in it, and but doing precise work and having a sense of humor must go together.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
Oh, there's
balance
so much other stuff too. I really had to cut it back, but it's 40 years of doing this stuff, so it's a
Yeah,
lot.
no, it's amazing. And I appreciate you consolidating it down to what you've got here, because I could go on forever watching this. Great. And I know there's some people, I know we're running late, but I know Bill has some questions. So I think we'll start with Bill, and if there are other questions in the chat, which I think there are, I'll turn it over to Bill. So
I'll start with one from the chat. Where can a potter go to take a class on making case molds and production molds?
I had a feeling someone would ask that. Well, I don't know. I don't do any teaching I've done a lot of teaching, but I don't teach in my shop. I've done a lot of workshops. I think I counted 17 workshops I've done in various colleges. Um, I I really don't know where to tell you. I mean, I've seen people online who are teaching such classes, but how good they are, I don't really know. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for you for that.
I do think, Bill, I might be wrong, but I feel like um, I'm going to get names wrong, so I won't name them. But I feel like the program, there was an industrial design program, I think at RISD, that might do something like that. Not like what you know, maybe,
Yeah.
but not maybe, but
You know, when I was at RISD, I'll just tell you briefly how one of the things that got me started doing this stuff. You know, I was at RISD, and well, I went there thinking I was going to be a printmaker, but I wound up back in ceramics, which I had done when I was younger. And Norm Schulman, who ran the department. So when I was there, Norm Schulman, Wayne Higbee, um, Jun Kaneko, um, some other people were there. It was a very good department. We had every semester we had visiting artists, and we had Norm brought in an old schoolmate of his, Don Frith, who wrote Moldmaking for Ceramics.
sure.
And he did a demonstration there. Nobody knew anything about it. We actually had a plaster room down in the basement that nobody even knew was there, with all decrepit old, just in a wreck. And he came in and got the students to clean it up, and he demonstrated some plaster turning and stuff. And that's when I first got the idea, oh yeah, this is kind of a cool thing. Yeah,
Well, that's very interesting.
yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Another, more of a comment from the chat. Shimpo makes an attachment for jiggering on their wheel.
Oh, yep, I believe they do. Yes, yeah. And let me also say this: you know, slip casting plates is kind of problematical, and I had a piece on my website about different ways to approach slip casting and clay making ways of making plates with molds that fit on a wheel. And they asked me to, Ceramic Monthly magazine asked me to expand it. And I did like a 6-page technical article about called slip casting plates. You could probably find that somewhere. Actually, if you go to my website, you find the article that I wrote, and then there's a link to that Ceramics Monthly article.
And what is the URL for your website?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should say that. It's mehlmandesign.com. And don't forget, it's MEHL. Everybody gets that wrong. MEHLMAN design.com. And if you want to email me, it's dan@mehlmandesign.com. Oh, okay. Okay, there you go. And if you put in the email, or you can reach me through the website. There's a contact page. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Great.
Another question. What material do you use to make case molds?
Case molds. Well, when I worked for this guy I learned from, we used Hydrostone. I think nowadays, if I want to use a hard gypsum cement, I prefer UltraCal 30. But I also have done a lot of rubber case molds, and there are pluses and minuses to that. Yeah, UltraCal, we used to use Hydrocal. UltraCal is very low expansion, which is a good thing for cases. So that's what I've used. I think we used to make the rails of the cases out of white Hydrocal, and the faces of the cases we made with Hydrostone. So they're all different gypsum cements. USG makes so many different industrial plasters. Yeah.
So I have a question, just kind of the preface for my question. And you may know that I used to work in the model shop at Hall China Company.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And my boss there, when he was a young man, his first big project was working with Eva Zeisel on the Hallcraft line.
Aha.
And he said that she was very exacting,
Yes.
kind of tough to work with, but he was really proud of the results. So my
Yeah,
question is, when you make a reproduction of one of Eva's designs, I would imagine that she would be very exacting, and she has an amazing sense of feel. Everything would need to be so exacting. And
Yes.
Could you say something?
Well, it was
that?
like that, and let me since you bring it up, I'll tell you a story that coffee pot, the Castleton Museum coffee pot. When Marek made those samples, he had her up to his studio, and he had on a table. I'm going to brag here a little bit. he had that cast from my mold sitting there, and he had the original Castleton piece next to it. And she came in and she kind of hemmed and hawed and said, "Oh, the curves are not as sweet. It's not quite as nice." And then Marek said, "No, you're looking at the wrong one. It's the new one that you like." So now I always give myself a little pat on the back for that. Yeah. But she was fun to work with, wicked sense of humor, really interesting person. And we really enjoyed working. A lot of her shapes, she just cut paper. You take a piece of paper, you fold it in half, you cut out the profile, and you open it up. And she would give me what am I supposed to do with it? Oh, well, you just rub it with some, and so I would have to actually make a real drawing from it. But she did a lot of design work that way.
That's similar to what my boss at Hall China said. He would give her crayon drawings.
Yeah. Well, she was fascinating to work for. It was a great honor to work for her.
So another question, for rubber case molds, did you have distortion issues from the shrinking? And did you have a solution for that?
Well, I don't know about shrinking. The rubbers I've worked with, which I don't particularly care to do. I'll tell you what I wish it would take me a while to find the pictures. But what I do when I make rubber cases, which I don't do that often anymore, is these are urethane rubber cases. And the thing about rubber is, okay, compare, if you're talking about cases, rubber as opposed to a gypsum cement or like a hydric stone case. With the rubber, once you pour it, there's nothing you can do to it. Whereas a gypsum case, you can still work on it a little bit and clean things up. The rubber ones are much easier for the mold maker to work with. He doesn't have to prepare the plaster or a hydrostone case every time. You can just pour right in that rubber and pop the piece out. And the rubber picks up every little detail down to a fingerprint. The thing I don't like I always bothered me about rubber is you've got this piece that's taking a perfect impression, but if you put it down on a table and there's a crumb of plaster there that lifts, that distorts it a little bit, those mold sections are not going to fit together. So the way I make rubber cases is I build, again, I do a lot of woodwork. I have that whole wood shop there. I build a permanent wooden frame. And so that becomes the frame to pour the rubber in, but then it becomes a permanent thing that the rubber nests in. So now the rubber is doing the work of picking up all the detail, but it's nested in this mother kind of frame that keeps it from any chance of distorting.
That seems like a lot of work.
It's a heck of a lot of work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
And yeah, I would have showed you pictures if we had more time. Yeah.
Another question, if you want to use a clay piece to make a slip cast mold, do you use the greenware or do you use bisque?
Bisque, I would never try to make a mold off an unfired piece. Okay, so my routine is when potters ask me to do this, I tell them, don't glaze it because then you're going to be picking up whatever defective surface the glaze may have. So give me bisqueware, and then I throw a little shellac on it to do an initial seal, and then I'll spray it with a couple of coats of clear Krylon, the Krylon acrylic spray paint. The clear stuff doesn't have any pigment in it, so it's very thin. And you can pull a mold right off that. I mean, I guess you could do it out of greenware if it's a one-part mold, but if it's more than a one-part mold, you're asking for trouble.
So just one final question. First, there's a comment, wonderful talk.
Thank you.
When you go in a restaurant or store, do you find yourself looking at the items with the creator's eye?
Oh, I thought you're going to ask me, do I find myself turning the pieces over and dumping dinner in my lap, which is probably happened to you guys too, I bet. Do I look at, yeah, of course, I look at everything with the designer's eye. Sure. I mean, it's natural. I always look at who made everything. I'll go to thrift shops and go through stuff just to look at who made this, and what does it look like? So yeah, I'm interested in all that stuff. Yeah.
That's great. I think we're going to have to wrap it up. All of you that have stayed with us, unless somebody has some question, you want to raise your hand or something. Otherwise, I think we'll thank Dan very much, and thank you for all sticking with us. And you're all diehard modeler, mold maker, designer people that are out there. Thank you. That was great, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
What a privilege to have you talk. Thank
Well,
you.
this was great. I look forward to watching it next week after you've posted it up.
Well, it might be sooner than next week.
Okay.
Anyway, good night, everybody. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
good night. Thank you, everybody.